Chapter 36, He drinks the bejeweled nectar, I taste the ice-heart jade urn. The hoarse voice contained a slight chill and was rough like sandpaper. Yearning and eagerness could be detected from the other party's tone. "There's wine, of course," Bu Fang nodded and said. He wanted to slowly enjoy the wine, but since there was a customer, he put down the wine cup from his hands. That man delightedly stepped into the store, sat down at a table, and hoarsely said, "Owner, give me a jar of wine." Bu Fang expressionlessly acknowledged with a nod. Then he turned to look at the menu and there was a new dish on it. Ice-heart jade urn wine, 15 crystals per jar. It's only 15 crystals? It's really not expensive. Bu Fang was startled, but quickly understood the reason. Even though the ice-heart jade urn wine was a fine wine, the ingredients used were not that expensive compared to the other dishes. Its only selling point was the tedious manufacturing process of the 9 brewing method. As for the ingredients, they were considered ordinary. The rice used was a superior type of spirit rice, but was not much better than the pearl rice used in egg-fried rice. "System, isn't the price too cheap?" Bu Fang silently asked the system. "The price set by the system is reasonable. It is determined by the combination of ingredients, process, and time. The ice-heart jade urn wine is still a mundane wine after all, so the price won't be too high. Compared to fruit wine and spirit wine made from high-grade ingredients, there'll still be quite a difference in price. 15 crystals is already the maximum for a mundane wine," the system solemnly explained. Bu Fang nodded to indicate that he understood. "The ice-heart jade urn wine will cost 15 crystals per jar," Bu Fang expressionlessly said to the man wearing the bamboo hat. 15 crystals? The man seemed to be slightly surprised. It seemed slightly ridiculous for a jar of wine to cost 15 crystals. However, when he looked at the menu, he became silent. After a while, he said, "I'll have a jar. When I passed by the alleyway earlier on, I was suddenly attracted by the smell of the rich wine aroma that was drifting out. I hope the wine here is worthy of its price." Quality goods did not need advertising. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth slightly curled up. "You won't be disappointed by my wine," Bu Fang confidently replied. Then he walked back into the kitchen and took out a jar of ice-heart jade urn wine from a cupboard. The smaller earthen jar was actually not that big and was even smaller than the ordinary jars used to store wine. Bu Fang placed the jar of wine in front of the man wearing the bamboo hat and simply said, "Here's your wine." The man nodded, then slowly took off his black-veiled bamboo hat and finally unveiled his face. Bu Fang was slightly surprised by the other party's facial features. Just from looking at the profile, the man seemed familiar to him. As the other party took off the bamboo hat, a beautiful with a refined aura was revealed. He had a handsome face with eyes as bright as stars and a mouth that smiled naturally. "That's right. This guy actually resembles that sissy, Josia Long." "Owner, why are you looking at me like that?" the man chuckled and hoarsely asked. "You look familiar, that's all. Enjoy your drink," Bu Fang expressionlessly replied. Then he sat down and began to enjoy his own cup of wine. The man was unconcerned as well. His throat slightly moved as he removed the cloth cover of the wine jar. A rich wine aroma instantly gushed out like the eruption of a volcano and rushed through his nostrils into the depths of his heart. He was wholeheartedly indulging in the aroma. He started pouring the wine into the blue and white porcelain wine cup given by Bu Fang. The crystal-clear wine was as pristine as clear springs found in deep mountains and was not murky in the slightest. "Good wine." The man was unable to suppress his joy as he softly exclaimed. Then he carefully lifted up the wine cup and slowly drank from it. As the wine flowed down his throat, it instantly opened up the pores in his body. He violently exhaled as his eyes lit up and were filled with incredulity. He was completely captivated by the rich aroma and the ice and fire feeling of the wine. "Good wine. It's comparable to the bejeweled nectar wine from the Imperial Palace." The man praised it once more. It was strong, mellow, and aromatic. It was even able to stimulate the true energy within the body. It was definitely worth more than the 15 crystals. Ha ha. I didn't think that I would be able to find such a fine wine. I am really lucky. They're drinking the bejeweled nectar in the palace, while I am tasting the ice heart jade urn here. I am not losing out at all. The man laughed and poured another cup of wine. Drinking it down in one go, the spiciness in his throat caused a touch of redness to appear on his fair skin. Bu Fang was much more refined as he pleasantly sipped from the wine cup. His drinking capacity was not that good, so he only filled a small cup of wine. "Owner, do you have any dish that goes well with wine?" The man finished a cup of wine, then turned to Bu Fang, who was sipping from the wine cup, and asked. "No," Bu Fang simply replied. A slight disappointment appeared on his face, but quickly disappeared as he continued with his drinking. "Why are you still open for business today? Why didn't you go to watch the homecoming of the great General Zhou Meng?" the man asked Bu Fang. He was much more talkative after drinking a few cups of wine. "What does his homecoming have to do with me?" Bu Fang calmly replied. The man suddenly went into a daze, then started laughing and seemed to be really happy. "The owner is a hot-blooded person. Let me give you a toast." The man laughed and drank down a cup of wine. Bu Fang remained expressionless as he continued to leisurely sip from his wine cup. Someone once said that there were two methods to drink wine. The first method was purely drinking the wine. It was just pouring the wine into the mouth and tasting the mellowness. The other method was drinking emotions instead of wine. Drinking wine when having different emotions would produce different tastes. That was how a person who truly knew wine would drink. When someone drank when he was in love, he would be overjoyed. When someone drank when he was angry, he would be daunting even if he was not angry. When someone drank when he was sorrowful, he would become melancholy. When someone drank when he was happy, he would not be able to stop drinking. That's right, what does his homecoming have to do with you? No matter how glorious he is, he's still an executioner with blood-stained hands. He's still just a sharp blade in the hands of Ji Qingfen. The man suddenly became melancholy as he rapidly drank cup after cup. This is someone with the story, Bu Fang blinked and thought as he continued to sip from his wine cup. After that, the man spoke very little as he continued to constantly pour and drink the wine. Soon, a jar of ice heart jade urn wine was finished and the man seemed to be slightly intoxicated as his eyes turned cloudy. The intensity of the ice heart jade urn wine was unimaginable for Bu Fang. He might be able to drink half a jar of ordinary wine, but he would only be able to drink 3 cups of the ice heart jade urn wine at most. However, this man was able to completely finish the entire jar and was only slightly intoxicated. His drinking capacity was truly shocking. "Owner, there's no more wine. Get me another jar," the man said with a frown. "Each person is limited to 1 jar," Bu Fang simply replied. He was also finished with the cup of wine in his hands and his face was slightly flushed. The man banged on the table with his hand and lightly belched as dozens of crystals appeared on the table. "Owner, the amount of crystals is not a problem. Get me another jar." "The store's rules, each person is limited to 1 jar," Bu Fang remained unmoved as he expressionlessly replied. The man frowned, then his hand suddenly banged on the table and the sword that was wrapped up in a rag immediately came out of its sheath. The cry of the sword incessantly resounded like a dragon's roar within the store. The man was holding the sword with one hand as he pointed it at Bu Fang. The tip of the sword was only an inch away from Bu Fang's nose and he could even feel the chill emanating from it. Faint goosebumps instantly covered Bu Fang's entire body, but he remained expressionless. "Do you know who I am? Do you really dare to not provide wine to me?" the man teasingly said with a smile. "Why should I care who you are? Are you trying to cause trouble?" Bu Fang simply replied. Even though the tip of the sword was only an inch away, he remained unmoved by it. The man watched Bu Fang for a while, then sheathed the long sword and wrapped it back in the rags. The sword energy that was raging within the storm moments ago vanished. The owner is truly a strange person. Here is 30 crystals, I am reserving tomorrow's Ice Heart Jade Urn wine, the man said with a laugh. Then he put on his bamboo hat, slung his long sword behind his back and headed toward the entrance. As he reached the entrance, he asked, "Does the owner really not know who I am?" "I don't know, and there's no need for me to know. Anyone who enters my store is a customer. I'll welcome anyone as long as they don't cause trouble," Bu Fang seriously said. "Ha ha. Good. I, Zhou Yu of the Void Sword Pavilion, acknowledge you as a friend." The man laughed as he suddenly stepped out of the entrance and disappeared into the windy autumn. Zhou Yu? His surname is Zhou. Bu Fang pondered. However, he pursed his lips and muttered to himself, "What an egoistic fellow. Who acknowledged you as a friend?" As he finished muttering, the voice of the system suddenly rang out in his mind. Chapter 37, Sweet and Sour Ribs and Meteor Cutting Technique. My host, congratulations for earning 500 crystals and completing a short-term objective. You shall soon receive the system reward. The system reward is being released. The system's solemn voice rang out in Bu Fang's mind, startling him and waking him up from his slight intoxication. He did not even realize that so many days had passed and he had already earned 500 crystals. Even Bu Fang's expressionless face twitched and a smile appeared as the corners of his mouth curled up. Young man aiming to become the god of cooking, congratulations for completing a short-term sales mission. You have once again taken a step to achieving your goal. Reward, Sweet and Sour Ribs Cooking Method, Meteor Cutting Technique Training Method, and 1 fragment of the God of Cooking set. Sweet and sour ribs? When Bu Fang heard the solemn voice of the system say this phrase, he subconsciously swallowed his saliva. He was very familiar with this dish, because it was one of his favorite dishes back on Earth. Bu Fang was joyous that he finally unlocked a new dish, and it was even the sweet and sour ribs. He was so excited that he was walking on air. A delicious dish of sweet and sour ribs would be extremely fragrant and the meat would be tangerine in color. The taste would be sour-sweet and would be crispy on the outside while remaining tender in the inside. As one bit down on it, the rich fragrance of the meat would create an aromatic explosion in their mouths and mesmerize them. The sweet and sour ribs was a dish that captivated people. Bu Fang endured the urge to immediately start cooking the sweet and sour ribs and check the training method for the meteor cutting technique instead. Strictly speaking, he was not an amateur when it came to handling knives. After all, he had been cooking for many years and had grasped his own set of cutting techniques. Meteor Cutting Technique Training Method. As a young man aiming to become the god of cooking, you need to be superb with your cutting techniques. The cutting technique training mode will now be activated. Completing the daily cutting technique training will award you with cutting technique experience points and improve your cutting technique. When you master the meteor cutting technique, your knife will be as swift as a meteorite as you precisely and perfectly cut any ingredient into equal pieces. Bu Fang was startled, then the character panel naturally appeared in his mind. Host, Bu Fang. True Energy Cultivation Level, 3rd grade, has already achieved the ability to manifest true energy outside of the body. As the god of cooking in the fantasy world, you will definitely need to make use of true energy when cooking. Work hard, young man. Cooking talents, yet to be unlocked. Skills, Level 1 Meteor Cutting Technique, 0-100. Tools, Fragments of God of Cooking Set, 3/4. God of Cooking Overall Rating, Apprentice Chef, you can finally cook ingredients with your true energy. Practice your cutting technique and the road to becoming the god of cooking will open for you. Work hard, young man. System Level, 3 stars, conversion ratio is at 25%, customers are allowed to bring ingredients slower than 4th grade. After Bu Fang finished reading the updated panel, he took a deep breath and exhaled to calm his agitation. As he lifted up his hand and exerted his will, he felt a snake-like burst of energy swiftly flowing through one of the meridians in his body and gushing out from his palm like a stream of white gas. Manifestation of true energy. That was the manifestation of true energy. Bu Fang's mouth was wide open in shock. He felt as if he was an expert in the novels, and it felt unreal to him. In order to become a third-grade battle maniac, he needed the energy of 100 crystals, and he had earned 500 crystals. The conversion ratio, when the system level was 2 stars, was at 20%. After conversion, the true energy he gained was worth 100 crystals. Thus, he was able to break through and become a battle maniac. Bu Fang had just become a second-grade battle master a few days ago, and now, he had just broken through once more. Even he found it to be slightly difficult to believe. If someone else was to witness this, they would be even more astonished. However, Bu Fang's astonishment did not last long, and he quickly calmed down. He was different from the others. Even though his true energy level was at 3rd grade, if he were to fight against Zhao Xiaolong, he would be easily defeated. That was to say that his cultivation level might be high, but his fighting prowess was worthless. However, so what if I am useless at fighting? I have white heat, Bu Fang thought. System, how much true energy do I need to reach 4th grade? Bu Fang asked. 4th grade battle spirit requires 1,000 crystals. 5th grade battle king requires 10,000 crystals. 6th grade battle emperor requires 100,000 crystals. The system solemnly replied to Bu Fang. Bu Fang clutched his chest as he resisted the urge to vomit blood. How frustrating. How many plates of egg fried rice would he need to sell to get 100,000 crystals? It was definitely more than enough for him to sell until his old age. It looks like my hopes of covertly acting conceited using my cultivation level in the future is dashed. Bu Fang regretfully said with a sigh. If a 6th grade battle emperor needed 100,000 crystals, then a 7th grade battle saint would need 1,000,000 crystals. My heavens, 1,000,000 crystals. If it was piled into a mountain, it could even crush me to death. If I continue calculating, an 8th grade dwarf god. Good heavens. Bu Fang shuddered and did not dare to continue thinking about it. He calmed down. Whatever 7th grade or 8th grade was something completely unrelated to him at this point. There was no need for him to think about it right now. Bu Fang felt that his current life was not bad. After the opening hours was over, Bu Fang immediately closed the store's entrance and headed into the kitchen to do some research on the tantalizing sweet and sour ribs. Great Hall of the Imperial Palace. The doors of the majestic Great Hall were wide open as row upon row of slim and beautiful court ladies entered while carrying delicious dishes into the hall. As the sound of the pipe one resounded in the air, the sound of the say-to responded in kind. The scene within the Great Hall was filled with festivity. At the highest point in the Great Hall, the Emperor was sitting on a gold-colored wooden zansher tree. The table in front of him was filled with delicious dishes while 2 beautiful court ladies were gently waving a fan. Seated below the Emperor, on the left was the handsome and talented Great General Zhao Meng and the smiling Crown Prince, Ji Chenan. On the right was the 2nd Prince, King Yu, and the 3rd Prince, Ji Changsu. The mood between the 2 princes was slightly cold and awkward. Further below them were the court officials of the Light Twin Empire and the prestigious guests invited to the feast. The family members of the Zhou and Du Wang families were seated together. Wu Wang Xiaoyi was sitting next to Zhou Yanyu and was chatting with her. Zhao Xiaolong, on the other hand, was excitedly staring at a sapphire jar that was storing the wine, the bejeweled nectar. Like Zhao Xiaolong, the 3 barbarians of Wu Ang were licking their lips as they stared at the wine jar. There was a similarity between the 2 families, and that was the dishes in front of them, which were relatively untouched. It was a strange sight within the Great Hall. These dishes were all personally prepared by the Imperial Kitchen's chefs. The taste was definitely delicious, and it could be said to be the most delicious food within the Light Wind Empire. However, the Zhou siblings and Duang siblings all stopped eating after they each took a single bite. This dish tastes really bad. It's far worse than the smelly boss food, Wang Xiaoyi said as she disdainfully used her chopsticks to play around with the piece of fish. She had no appetite at all. Even though the same disdainful look did not appear on Zhou Yanyu's beautiful face, there was no sign that her chopsticks were going to move. She was only calmly watching the scene within the Great Hall. The only reason that we're here is for the bejeweled nectar wine. If it wasn't for the fact that Owner Boo's store doesn't have wine, I wouldn't even bother to come to the feast today. These dishes can't even compare to Owner Boo's egg fried rice, Zhao Xialong said with a sigh. When the three barbarians of Wuang heard what he said, they fiercely nodded, and Duang Zhan said, Owner Boo's Li's fish is truly delicious. Even people like us with bland taste buds were subdued. TCH. You're just exaggerating. How could a lousy store like that have any delicious food? Zhao Ruj was just elegantly sitting nearby. When he heard the conservation, he immediately sneered at them. What are you laughing at? If I say it's delicious, then it's delicious, Wang Zhan said while angrily staring at Zhao Ruj. The chefs of the Imperial Kitchen were personally selected by His Majesty from among famous chefs within the empire. They went through numerous strict screening to become an imperial chef. How can a mere chef from a restaurant in an alleyway compare to them? If you're praising him, are you suggesting that His Majesty is unable to discern talent? Zhao Ruj simply said. Even though Wang Xiaoyi felt that the smelly boss was a terrible person, she did not like it when someone said bad things about him. Her large eyes were staring at Zhao Ruj as she poutingly said, have you eaten smelly boss dishes? If you haven't eaten it before, then be quiet. Zhao Ruj's expression froze and he felt as if an invisible arrow had pierced into his chest. The next dish, the bejeweled nectar wine. Just when Zhao Ruj was about to retaliate, the sharp voice of a eunuch resounded out. Then all of the guests started cheering as the climax of the feast finally arrived. Zhao Ruj snorted, then pointed toward the sapphire jars that were stacked together and said, you see the bejeweled nectar wine? Just this wine is enough to compare against all of the dishes in that entire restaurant. Bejeweled nectar wine was the #1 wine in the Light Wind Empire. He was that confident in it. Chapter 38, of a lie with a venomous tongue would not be able to get married. What did you say? Wang Xiaoyi was very unhappy as she yelled and stared at Zhao Ruj while pouting her lips. How could the bejeweled nectar wine compare to the smelly boss entire restaurant? Is this Zhao Ruj an idiot? Does he really understand the smelly boss restaurant? Even though the bejeweled nectar wine was expensive, a jar was only 500 gold coins. That's not even comparable to a plate of ordinary egg fried rice, Wang Xiaoyi thought. Wang Xiaoyi, did I say something wrong? How much could a store located in a god-forsaken alleyway be worth anyway? Zhao Ruj said with a sneer as he ignored the Lalai's furious gaze. HMPH. Your words just expose the fact that you've never tested the smelly boss dishes. Wang Xiaoyi snorted and disdainfully turned her head. If you had really tasted them, then you wouldn't have said that. You can try asking anyone who has tasted Owner Boo's dishes and see if their answer is as ignorant as yours. Ignorance isn't scary. What's scary is that you're acting conceited when you don't know anything. Zhao Ruj's handsome face turned sour and was so exasperated that he almost vomited blood. How did he not realize before that this Wang Xiaoyi had such a venomous tongue? A lie with a venomous tongue would not be able to get married. When Zhou Yanyu and the rest saw the disgraced Zhao Ruj, they could not help but burst out laughing. This made Zhao Ruj's face turn ever more sour and he felt as if the entire world was laughing at him. And like he thought, Zhou Yanyu and the rest were laughing at his ignorance. Young masters, this is the bejeweled nectar wine bestowed by His Majesty. Please give it a taste. Several slim and beautiful court ladies with voices as soft as foam were carrying sapphire jars as they slowly approached each table and carefully poured out the wine. The bejeweled nectar wine is so in demand that even the imperial city is only supplied with 2,000 jars each year at most. This time, His Majesty took out 500 jars to celebrate General Zhou's victory. You people should properly taste such a fine wine that you would never be able to taste in that pathetic little store. Zhao Rouge lifted up the wine cup and sneered. Zhao Zilong and the three barbarians of Wuang were already captivated by the appearance of the wine. HMPH. Who told you that the smelly boss doesn't have any wine? He's brewing it right now. Now wanting to admit defeat, Wuang Xiaoyi said. Zhao Rouge's eyes lit up. Oh, then let's have a wager. How about we bet whether the wine in that store can compare with the bejeweled nectar wine? Wager? Are you trying to bet with our little sister? Before Wuang Xiaoyi could accept the bet, the three barbarians of Wuang were infuriated. The Wuang family had always been paying close attention to the ideological education of their descendants and were especially strict with Wuang Xiaoyi. Normally, they would be urging her to practice martial arts and embroidery to develop her into a virtuous, beautiful, intelligent, athletic young woman. The first thing this Zhao Rouge mentioned was a wager. Is he trying to misguide our little sister? I'll accept your wager. The three barbarians of Wuang were able to prevent Wuang Xiaoyi from accepting the bet, but the quiet Zhao Yanyu suddenly opened her delicate, red lips and softly said. Everyone was shocked that the goddess, Zhao Yanyu, would accept the wager with Zhao Rouge. Excellent. And if the goddess loses, you will be accompanying me for moon viewing abroad a boat for a night. How about it? Zhao Rouge was elated. He just realized that even the reserved and cool-headed Zhao Yanyu could be impulsive at times. Zhao Yanyu faintly smiled. Her beautiful face was as pretty as a picture and captivated anyone who was looking at her. Fine, but if you lose, you'll give me a 5th-grade spirit-gathering pill, Zhao Yanyu indifferently said. Her voice that was as beautiful as the song of birds sounded like thunder as it resounded in Zhao Rouge's ears. This. A 5th-grade spirit-gathering pill is a little. Zhao Rouge was slightly hesitating. Honestly speaking, wagering a spirit-gathering pill was not something he could afford to do. You bastard, you were so full of it when you were trying to wager with my sister. Now that the goddess is wagering with you, you're acting like a dog? Are you looking down on my sister or something? Wuang Zhan shouted while pointing at Zhao Rouge. He's afraid of losing, Wuang Xiaoyi said with a sneer as she crossed her arms across her chest. Lose? Would he really lose? Would the calculating Zhao Rouge, who devised the strategy to kill a 5th-grade battle king, when he was only a 3rd-grade battle maniac, really be afraid of losing? No, would he really lose? I accept. There's no way that kind of store would have any decent wine at all, Zhao Rouge said with a snort. As the celebration feast was ongoing in the Great Hall, Bu Fang was merrily sharpening his knife in the kitchen. He took out an ingredient prepared by the system from the freezer. The part of the boar used in the sweet and sour ribs was the meat near the spine. The spine would first be chopped into pieces and starch would be applied to it. Then, each piece would be deep-fried in a wok filled with oil. Finally, a special sweet and sour sauce would be poured onto it to complete the dish. The prime rib placed on the chopping board was not the same as the one used in the golden shumei, the flame boar. The fat and tender ribs were filled with spirit energy and the marbling was clear like a piece of drawing. It was obviously not an ordinary piece of pork. This pork comes from a 5th-grade spirit beast that roams in Mount Tangdang, the flying cloud boar. It was named for the white patches on its black fur that resembled clouds and its fast movement speed. The flying cloud boar has strong and muscular thighs that taste terrible. However, the meat around the area of its spine is not only fresh and tender, but is filled with spirit energy as well. The quality of the meat is excellent. The meat of a 5th-grade spirit beast. This is very precious. Bu Fang's eyes lit up as he picked up a kitchen knife and tried to chop up the prime ribs. Surprisingly, the ribs remained intact and the rebound force even caused Bu Fang's arm to go numb. As expected, the meat of a 5th-grade spirit beast is truly extraordinary. Bu Fang said with a sigh, then he continued to persevere in chopping and tenderizing the meat. After separating the prime ribs into individual ribs, he placed them into starch paste that he had just prepared. The source of the starch paste was remarkable as well. It was made from a spirit potato found in the central wastelands of the Lightwind Empire. After all of the pieces of meat were coated in starch, Bu Fang began to prepare a wok filled with oil. He used a high-quality oil to fill up half of the wok and waited for the temperature to rise. Holding his palm above the surface of the oil, he could feel the heat coming from it. When the heat was just hot enough to scald his hand, Bu Fang placed all of the starch-coated ribs into the wok. PSSST. As the pieces of meat were quickly turning within the oil, the starch on the exterior started to rapidly turn light yellow. Bu Fang was using a long chopstick to constantly turn each piece of meat. He was skillfully ensuring that every single piece was being perfectly cooked to ensure they all had the same taste. As the starch on the exterior of every piece started to turn into a darker shade of yellow, Bu Fang scooped all of them up and placed them into a big pottery bowl. There was still oil seeping out from the starch on the surface. Bu Fang was experienced with making the sweet and sour sauce. The system had already prepared the needed ingredients and the amount used was left up to him. Very quickly, the tangerine sweet and sour sauce was prepared and the pieces of meat inside the big pottery bowl had also slightly cooled down. Even though there was still steam coming from them, oil had stopped seeping from the starch. He poured the sweet and sour sauce into the big pottery bowl, then stirred it for a while and was ready to place it on a plate. From pouring the sweet and sour sauce to lightly mixing the pieces of meat, the entire process should not exceed 30 seconds. This really tested Bu Fang's skills, as he needed to be fast to ensure that each piece was evenly coated with the sauce. Placing the pieces of meat onto the oval blue and white porcelain plate, a delicious, aromatic, tantalizing plate of sweet and sour ribs was completed. A sweet and sour fragrance was drifting in the air and was continuously rushing into his nasal cavities, making him unable to help but swallow his saliva. Grabbing a pair of bamboo chopsticks, Bu Fang carried the plate of sweet and sour ribs to the dining area. As he walked, the fragrance would constantly drift to his face, causing him to salivate and increasing his eagerness to taste the dish. The fragrance of the sweet and sour ribs was very rich and was a mixture of sweet, sour and meat. The big black dog lying at the entrance was sleeping, but its eyes suddenly opened. They were so bright that it was like a light bulb was turned on in the darkness. Within an instant, the dog disappeared into the store. And so, as Bu Fang was about to send a piece of sweet and sour ribs into his mouth, he realized that a pair of bright doggy eyes was staring at the piece of meat clasped between his chopsticks. Chapter 39, Slicing 1,000 Radishes. They were as bright as a full moon in darkness and as clear as a white spot in black ink. The eyes of the big black dog were staring straight at the steaming piece of ribs, coated with a tangerine sweet and sour sauce and exuding a tempting fragrance, between Bu Fang's chopsticks. The craving bursting out from the eyes of the dog made Bu Fang jump up in shock. My gosh! Blackie, do you know how frightening it is when you suddenly appear like that? Bu Fang's hand trembled and almost dropped the piece of sweet and sour ribs. Blackie's tongue was hanging out of its mouth as it stared at Bu Fang. Do you want to eat this? Bu Fang expressionlessly waved the piece of sweet and sour ribs around and Blackie cooperatively nodded its head with its tongue hanging out. Bu Fang's stiff face was unmoved as the corner of his mouth widened into a smile. Then he opened his mouth and shoved the fat and tender sweet and sour ribs into his mouth in one go. His entire mouth was bulging with the sweet and sour ribs as he started to bite down and chew. There was even some tangerine sweet and sour sauce stains on his lips. Blackie's eyes had been staring at that sweet and sour ribs. When it discovered Bu Fang was about to eat a piece of rib, its eyes turned dark and lost its will to continue living as it felt the entire sky was about to collapse. How infuriating. This human is definitely doing this on purpose. Blackie thought. For the sack of that piece of rib, Blackie was enraged. Its hackles were raised as it bared its teeth while staring at Bu Fang. Bu Fang, at that moment, did not have the time to care about Blackie. The extremely good taste of the meat of the flying cloud boar was bursting out from within his mouth. The rich fragrance of the meat was like a bomb as it instantly exploded and completely collapsed his taste buds. The perfectly done sweet and sour sauce flawlessly mixed with high-grade pork was neither too sour nor too sweet. The texture of the meat was not hard, and after a perfectly controlled deep fry, it became appropriately crispy. The taste of the starch coating mixed with pork was extremely delicious. The pork used was the meat near the spine and had become softer and tender after Bu Fang had sufficiently tenderized it. There was even some crunchy cartilage mixed inside, which made creaking sounds when chewed and also slightly increased its tastiness. Bu Fang's eyes completely lit up as his chopsticks picked up another piece of sweet and sour ribs and shoved it into his mouth with lightning speed. His eyes were narrowed as he enjoyably chewed the ribs in his mouth while being captivated within the sea of fragrance. The big black dog was furious. It was shaking its tail as it paced around. Its doggy eyes were filled with conflict as it thought, should I directly snatch the ribs from this foolish human? No, what if this human refuses to feed this handsome dog later? This handsome dog's taste has already been spoiled by the foolish human's cooking. Should I snatch it? Or should I not snatch it? As the amount of sweet and sour ribs rapidly disappeared from the blue and white porcelain plate, Blackie felt as if its heart was constantly being emptied. Finally, there was only a single piece left on the plate. Bu Fang's chopsticks had already slowly landed on that final piece of rib. As the chopsticks clamped onto the meat, the sweet and sour sauce coated on it splattered everywhere and filled the air with the fragrant scent. Blackie's eyes were almost filled with tears as it stared at the final piece. Bu Fang's mouth was still chewing, his expression was both comical and hilarious, and might be his most colorful expression ever. Here, take it. It looks like I am still too kind-hearted. Bu Fang simply said as he handed over the final piece to Blackie. Blackie was immediately overjoyed. Its doggy eyes were filled with an inexplicable light as it ate the piece of rib in one bite. The rich aroma of the meat bursted out within Blackie's mouth and its entire body shivered. With the face filled with pleasure, it lightly howled out. Bu Fang was dumbfounded. How did it turn from a dog into a wolf just by eating a piece of meat? After swallowing the piece of rib, Blackie was still slightly unsatisfied. However, that heinous Bu Fang had already finished all of the ribs. It could only helplessly return to the entrance and resume its sleep. Bu Fang leisurely cleaned up the plate and went to bed. The next morning, Bu Fang got out of bed early. He went into the kitchen after washing up. He specially got up earlier that day in order to practice the meteor cutting technique mentioned by the system. From the sound of it, it seemed pretty impressive. The moment Bu Fang entered the kitchen, his line of sight was immediately attracted by a kitchen knife that was both thick and big. Please slice 1,000 radishes using this custom-made kitchen knife within an hour. Every single piece should be exactly the same. After finishing, you shall be awarded with 10 points of meteor cutting technique proficiency, the system solemnly said. Slicing 1,000 radishes within an hour and each piece had to be exactly the same. It was almost an impossible mission for an ordinary chef, but it was not that difficult for Bu Fang. However, when he grabbed the thick and big custom-made kitchen knife, his entire face darkened. The kitchen knife made from unknown materials was extremely heavy. When using a single hand, Bu Fang could only lift it up. It would be too difficult if he had to use this kitchen knife to complete the mission. The system, are you deliberately making things difficult for me? Bu Fang asked the system with a cold expression. As a young man aiming to become the god of cooking, are you telling me that you can't take a little hardship? The road to becoming the god of cooking isn't easy. Young man, you need to learn to endure hardships. The system thinks highly of you, work hard, the system seriously encouraged him, causing Bu Fang to be dumbfounded. He knew that arguing with the system was pointless, so he could only train according to the requirements. Retrieving a white and plump radish, Bu Fang lifted the kitchen knife and started to skillfully dice it. The radish was only an ordinary white radish, but the quality was extremely good and was both succulent and plump. After the first radish was done, Bu Fang expressionlessly grabbed the second one and immediately started dicing it. Since he had already started the training, then he would wholeheartedly engage in it. A cutting technique was actually a type of skill that needed attentiveness, and paying attention was the only way to perfect the skill. And so, the sound of a kitchen knife colliding with a chopping board rang out from Fang's little store since early in the morning. Eh? Smelly boss didn't open the store for business today? As Wang Xioi and the rest arrived at Fang's little store, they discovered that there was already a group of people queuing up at the entrance. Many of them were trying to peek into the store with faces filled with doubt. HMPH. Don't tell me he found out about our wager and is afraid of opening for business? Rouge, dressed in white, was elegantly sneering. Owner Bu is afraid? Are you here to make jokes? You just have to obediently wait and hand over the 5th grade spirit gathering pill to elder sister Yan Yu. The little Lali snorted in reply. The 3 barbarians of Huang and the Zhou siblings were there as well. They were also baffled by the fact that the store was not open for business yet. It could be that owner Bu was delayed by some matter. Zhou Yanyu gently said with her beautiful voice, "Let's wait for a while." Just as her voice faded, the entrance of the store suddenly opened and Bu Fang expressionlessly appeared in front of their eyes. "The store is open for business," Bu Fang simply said, then turned around and went back in. There were only 8 people in the queue, and even after adding Zhou Rouge and the rest, there were only 15 customers. Wang Xioi eagerly ran in to help while taking the opportunity to conveniently inquire the smelly boss about the status of the wine brewing. "Eh? Smelly boss, why does your hand keep shaking?" Wang Xioi curiously stared at Bu Fang's hand that was continuously twitching. Bu Fang glanced at her and simply said, "It's nothing, it'll be fine after a while." His hand was shaking because he had been slicing radishes with that heavy kitchen knife for over an hour. It would be shaking even if he had used an ordinary kitchen knife, not to mention that heavy custom-made kitchen knife. Soon, the system manipulated a stream of gentle energy to flow into Bu Fang's arm, causing the numbness and the spasm to disappear. Fatty Jin and his buddies excitedly ordered their dishes, and Xioi did not immediately inform Bu Fang about the wager. After Fatty Jin and company were satisfied, it was finally the turn of Zhou Rouge and the rest, who had just stepped into the store. As Zhou Rouge stepped into the store, he suddenly had an inexplicable urge to cry. He would finally be able to test the store's dishes. "Smelly boss, this fellow is wagering that your wine is inferior to the Imperial Palace's bejeweled nectar." As Zhou Rouge and the rest entered, Wang Xioi loudly said to Bu Fang. Bu Fang was slightly startled, but then expressionlessly replied, "Bejeweled nectar wine is nothing." Chapter 40, "Compared to my wine, the others are garbage." The bejeweled nectar wine is nothing? The moment those words were said, the mood within the store slightly froze. The 3 barbarians of Huang and Zhao along were staring at Bu Fang. They were wine lovers, and the bejeweled nectar wine was the best wine they had ever tasted. However, when coming out of Bu Fang's mouth, it was nothing. "Ha ha! Smelly boss, the way you said it was really handsome," Wang Xioi happily exclaimed while clapping her hands. She liked the kind of self-confident feeling that Bu Fang had. "Tch, he's just a country bumpkin. Has he even tasted the bejeweled nectar wine? He's only speaking nonsense." Zhou Rouge disdainfully snorted and pursed his lips. How could the owner of a little restaurant like Bu Fang know the test of the #1 wine in the Li Twin Empire that was personally picked out by the emperor from tens of thousands of wine? Bu Fang knitted his eyebrows and looked toward Zhou Rouge. He was very familiar with this fellow, only because Zhou Rouge had tried to bribe him with money over and over again. "Compared to my wine, the other mundane wines are garbage." Bu Fang simply said with bursting self-confidence. He was absolutely confident of the Ice Heart Jade Urn wine. "Owner Bu, you have wine here?" Zhao Zialong's eyes lit up and a slight redness appeared on his fair face from agitation. Bu Fang just pointed toward the menu behind him and did not say anything. Everyone understood what he meant and turned their heads to look toward the menu. SSS. This sound was made by Zhao. It was his first time stepping into the store and his first time seeing the menu. Even though he had heard much about the astronomical prices of the dishes, he still sucked in a breath of cold air when he personally saw the prices. Wang Xiaoyi and the rest immediately rolled their eyes at him. What a country bumpkin. Was there a need to act so surprised? Ice Heart Jade Urn wine, 15 crystals per jar, Zhao Zialong softly read out. As expected, Owner Bu's dishes are expensive as usual. Zhao Yanyu let out a beautiful exclamation. 15 crystals per jar of wine was far more expensive than the bejeweled nectar wine, which only cost 500 gold coins. With such a comparison between the two solely based on their prices, bejeweled nectar wine was truly nothing. 15 crystals per jar? Have you gone crazy? Are you sure your wine is worth this price? Zhao Rouge could not believe it. 500 gold coins per jar for the bejeweled nectar wine was already considered an astronomical price. 15 crystals was practically insane. Owner Bu. There's no need to say anything else, I want a jar. Thankfully, my incredible foresight had already predicted that Owner Bu's wine would definitely not be cheap, so I brought a lot of crystals, Zhao Zialong excitedly said toward Bu Fang. Owner Bu, the three of us want a jar as well. If the Lee's fish is already so delicious, then this wine is surely good as well. Wang Zhen carefreely said. Zhao Rouge raised his eyebrows as he looked toward Zhao Zialong and the three barbarians of Wuang in surprise. They actually bought such an expensive wine. Could it be that the wine was really that good? Immediately, Zhao Rouge made up his mind. He gritted his teeth and said, I want a jar as well. HMPH. I'd like to see for what reason a wine from such a place could actually sell for 15 crystals. Zhao Rouge thought. Excuse me, there's only 3 jars of Ice Heart Jade Urn wine for sale per day. If you want to order it, you'll have to come again tomorrow. Bu Fang indifferently glanced toward Zhao Rouge and expressionlessly said. Zhao Rouge froze for a moment and his eyes were immediately filled with anger as he thought, you're rejecting me again. Do you have a grudge against me? Didn't you say that there are 3 jars per day? Since Zhao Zialong and the Wuang brothers are buying 2 jars, isn't there 1 more jar left that you can sell to me? Are you looking down on me? Zhao Rouge was infuriated. Facing the somewhat exasperated and furious Zhao Rouge, Bu Fang was slightly baffled and puzzled. However, his face was still indifferent as he replied, the last jar is already reserved. Reserved? An excuse. That's definitely an excuse. Zhao Rouge thought. Looking at that Bu Fang's expressionless face, he was tempted to throw his shoe at him. That face definitely deserved a beating. Then tell me, who reserved the 3rd jar of wine? I'll go and throw money at him until he gives it up. Zhao Rouge said with a gloomy expression. Oh, that's up to you. I don't care as long as you're not causing trouble within the store, Bu Fang simply said, then turned around and headed toward the kitchen. However, when he reached the entrance, he suddenly turned back and curiously asked, are you not going to order other dishes? Are you only going to drink? I'd like to have golden shumai, Zhao Yanyu softly said. Zhao Zialong was grinning as he ordered the improved egg fried rice. The 3 barbarians of Wuang ordered a portion of Lee's fish as usual since that was the only dish they could taste. What about you? Bu Fang's gaze landed on Zhao Rouge. Zhao Rouge narrowed his eyes and said, give me the sweet and sour ribs. If I am going to eat, I'll eat the most expensive dish. The others were surprised, and that was when they realized that there was actually a new dish on the menu. Their attentions were all attracted by the Ice Heart Jade Urn wine just now. Sweet and sour ribs? Alright. Fang nodded and went into the kitchen. The sweet and sour ribs, which cost 50 crystals, was the most expensive dish within the store so far. "Rouge, did you bring enough crystals?" Wang Xiaoyi could not help but ask. Even the princess of the Wang family was slightly shocked by the price of 50 crystals for a dish. "I don't lack money, so what if it costs 50 crystals? You better not forget about our wager. Yanyu, just wait for our moon viewing boat trip." Rouge confidently smiled. As the son of the minister of the left, he had his personal properties within the imperial city. 50 crystals was truly nothing to him. Actually, when cultivators reached the level of 5th grade Battle King, the crystals they needed for their cultivation were in the thousands. In order to achieve a breakthrough, they would even need to accumulate up to tens of thousands of crystals. That was the reason why crystals were nothing to higher-level cultivators. Even though Rouge was not a high-level cultivator, he had a lot of properties. There was also the fact that the target market for his businesses were cultivators, so he did not lack crystals. Rouge was faintly smiling as he sat down on a chair. He took out the sapphire jar that contained the bejeweled nectar wine, which he brought. He also brought his own wine cups and started to fill them. Then he beckoned toward Zhou Yanyu and the rest, and said, "Come and sit down. Let's taste the bejeweled nectar wine first." There was a reason why the bejeweled nectar wine was selected by the emperor to be the royal wine and was rated as the #1 wine in the Light Wind Empire. As soon as the cups were filled, a rich wine aroma instantly diffused into the air. Zhao Zilong and the 3 barbarians of Wuang were already close to losing their restraints on themselves. However, just when they were about to taste the bejeweled nectar wine, a figure slowly stepped into the store. It was as if the composed footsteps were filled with the strange magic. Everyone's gaze was attracted by that figure at the entrance. Dressed in a black robe, he was carrying a long sword wrapped in a rag and wore a black-veiled bamboo hat. His tall and slim figure was exuding a mysterious aura. The moment that person stepped into the store, it seemed as if the atmosphere had turned slightly colder. The muscles on the 3 barbarians of Wuang suddenly constricted as they alertly looked at the mysterious man wearing a bamboo hat. They could feel an extremely terrifying aura from him. The aura caused the true energy within their body to automatically circulate. That was the self-defense mechanism that occurs during a crisis. Zhou Yanyu and Zhao Zilong were startled for a moment and they started to closely watch the man as well. They felt the gaze behind the black veil seemed to have landed on them. "Who are you?" Rouge knitted his eyebrows and coldly asked. He felt that the man was slightly strange. With the current unstable situation within the imperial city, many experts from the sects were hiding within. Perhaps this man was an expert from the sects as well. "Me? I am just a diner." A hoarse voice like sandpaper rang out. The mysterious man directly sat down at the table near the entrance and placed the long sword wrapped in a rag onto the table. The rag was slightly decrepit and had lost its color and become stiff after numerous washing. "You? What are you ordering?" Wang Xiaoyi shyly asked. She was frightened by the man's aura. "I reserved a jar of ice heart jade urn wine from owner Bu yesterday. I am specially here today to retrieve the wine." The man continued to speak using a hoarse voice. "Retrieve the wine." Everyone was surprised for a moment, then weirdly looked toward Rouge. That fellow seemed to have said that he would throw money to buy the last jar of ice heart jade urn wine from the person who reserved it. Rouge was startled, then the corner of his mouth curled up. He elegantly sat down opposite to the man and confidently said, "Sell the ice heart jade urn wine to me. I'll give you 3 times the price." "I am not selling," the man indifferently replied. Rouge frowned and continued to say, 5 times the price. "I said, I am not selling. Do you know who I am? Are you trying to offend me?" Rouge threatened with a cold expression. After his 2 consecutive offers were rejected, Rouge was furious as well. Finally, the man seemed to lift his gaze and look at Rouge. His hoarse voice, as alarming as the sound of thunder, sounded out. Even if the minister of the left was here, he wouldn't dare to speak to me that way. Who do you think you are?